Thank you for tuning in to the Abbavilla Digest, our inaugural edition this January 2026. I'm Breneir Tzaracomprada. In this edition, we'll be covering the results of the 62nd general election, discussing the difficult and complicated government formation negotiations. In our first digest interview, we'll talk with Mximo Malt, the leader of the IDT. And finally, among other stories, we'll talk about a new space for our political nerds. We start off this inaugural edition of the Digest with coverage of the general election results for the 62nd Kosha and the complicated path towards government formation. Talossa saw an increase in voter turnout, but no party managed to achieve a majority. The last majority government in Talossa was the TNZ's Tzaracomprada cabinet in 2023. The Progressive Alliance came out ahead with 41 votes, or 44% of the vote. Second was the newly merged party, Union dels Reformistes Liberesti, or Union of Free Reformists, with 31 votes, or 33%. In third place was the Green Party with 13 votes, or 14%. Followed by the very new party, Indefensa Tradicionis, or IDT, with 7 votes, or 7%. And finally, another new party showed up, the Independent Greens, anarcho-surrealists, who managed to squeeze out 2 votes, or 2%. The Progressive Alliance saw a large increase in support, while the URL and the Greens remained stable, with the PA and the URL maintaining what they described as a cordon sanitaire over alleged sexual harassment by Green Party leader Breneir Tzaracomprada. There were limited options for governing coalitions, either a grand coalition between the URL and PA, or a coalition or confidence and supply agreement with the IDT and or anarcho-surrealist. As we mentioned earlier, the path towards government was not an easy one. 1 week following the election, on December 7th, the PA and IDT announced a formal coalition expected to command a bare majority of 102 seats in the COSA. The IDT would be given the culture portfolio in the upcoming government. This would not come to pass, however. Just a few days later, on December 15th, PA leader Alexandru Davinescu would issue a statement admitting the coalition agreement was, quote, reached before the IDT leader began expressing the full range of his ideas and acting in an erratic manner, unquote, and announced a party vote, quote, deciding whether to seek a no strings, no influence, confidence and supply agreement with the IDT or seek a confidence and supply agreement with the URL, unquote. Also within those 5 days, URL co-leader Mr. Shiva would describe the PA as the, quote, same old clowns, unquote, proclaimed that the incoming seneschal had lied to a party colleague, lied about immigration policy, and compared the actions of the incoming seneschal to those of an abusive husband, along with seeking repeated reassurances that the PA would not be engaging in cooperation with the Green Party leader, Breneir Tzaracomprada, who was repeatedly described as a sex pest, unquote. The URL, in an odd development, mixed these diatribes with an appeal for talks on a confidence and supply agreement between the URL and the PA. Unsurprisingly, this appeal was rejected by a vote of PA party members. Without a willingness to cooperate with the URL or the Green Party, this left the PA in a delicate spot. They needed the support of the party leader they had just thrown under the bus. Well, necessity does make interesting bedfellows, because they were able to work it all out, and the PA and IDT agreed to confidence and supply agreement. This was followed 2 weeks later by another confidence and supply agreement from the anarcho-surrealist, under terms that the PA government described as facilitating some weird messaging at times, unquote. Up next in the Digest's first one-on-one interview, we'll talk with IDT leader Mximo Malt. Some members of the opposition have described your views as anti-democratic. Would you please, for the benefit of the public and as a new political actor on the scene, describe your personal political views and those of your party?
I think that society has become chaotic and morally loose due to the fact that we are not grounded on a solid moral foundation, i.e., Christianity, and due to the fact that the Tolosa nation are descendants of the Amazighs under Roman rule. They became Orthodox Christians once it was legalized by Saint Constantine the Great. Now, some 1,000 years later, a German monk by the name of Martin Luther protested the sale of indulgence letters by Johann Tetzel, which triggered what's now known as the Protestant Reformation. Since then, people have been living under the fallacy that only trust in Jesus' atonement on the cross is sufficient for salvation, is enough to secure a spot in heaven. But Martin did not realize how prideful he was until it's too late. It was too late. Since then, historically, Catholic states that became Protestant are now majority atheist because they've lost their trust in their national churches. This is why orthodoxy is absolutely necessary for every nation and not just those in Eastern Europe. Now, one of our ancestors, St. Augustine of Hippo, is an Orthodox saint, even though some of his writings were heterodox. Now, forgive me if I went off topic, but my party is affiliated with the Western Rite movement of the Eastern Orthodox Church, which means that the Roman liturgies are used in an Orthodox theological context free from any heresy or falsehood, and this includes the Filioque Clause. On the issue of semi-absolute monarchy, we can plainly see a macronation called Liechtenstein, which can be described as a, quote, semi-constitutional monarchy. I would think that this would be beneficial for both Republicans and monarchists because they would enjoy the best of both worlds. Now, I don't favor absolute democracy that the URL advocates for because that would mean mob rule, and in short, it's very bad. I used to be an absolute monarchist, but I reevaluated my stance due to criticism. I also want to say that I despise fascism and all its manifestations and forms, no matter how appealing to me they may seem. This, and for this reason, I intend to learn from the opposition and how I can bring the country together peacefully under one king and one God.
It was quite a tumultuous path toward the eventual agreement between the IDT and the PA. Could you share your thoughts on the process toward government formation and the current status of the relationship between the government and the IDT as a provider of confidence and supply?
Seeing as you're a member of the COSA, Mr. Tzaracomprada, as you can plainly see, I and the Baron Seneschal do not agree unanimously on our ideologies. But what we do agree on is the importance of the monarchy and Elieth. Our stance on monarchism is the same as we both agree that it is a unifying symbol and powerful reminder of how our great nation came to be and is therefore necessary for our national pride as Tolossans. We both agree that Elieth should be used more, but our methods of implementation are different. I will advocate for exclusive use of Elieth in all walks of life in Tolosa, but I'm not sure how to do that without severe backlash and being branded as a fascist by some people. I care about our native culture, and I'm not letting pressure from our big neighbor pressure us to cave to their customs. Look what happened to the Native Americans. That didn't go too well. I will, with the Baron's assent, propose legislation to make Elieth the sole official language of the nation, with English being allowed as the lingua franca on specified channels and in private correspondence, and French will also be the chief diplomatic language in an effort to regain its long-lost status. I also intend on working with the Ladinch Nacional on making oral conversation courses comparable to that of the Pimsleur method of language learning.
You were initially put forward when there was an official coalition agreement between the IDT and the PA as the Minister of Culture, with the focus on the Talossan language. As we've discussed earlier in the program, that did not happen, but we would like to know more about your plans to increase awareness and use of the Talossan language. Could you tell us more about that?
So the big reason that I was cut off from the government was because I was watching Nick Fuentes' web show America First, because I agreed with some of his viewpoints when I first came across him. And when the leader of the URL made it known to me that he fancied cat boys, I started questioning my affinity to him. I said that I felt persecuted because I still agreed with a facet of his philosophy, but when I thought about it harder, I knew that I couldn't keep associating myself with an outspoken racist. I publicly denounced him with a formal apology, but that wasn't good enough for them, apparently. So I guess I'll have to show some proof of regret, but I don't know how that will happen without me humiliating myself profusely. Now, on the matter of Tolosan's status in our daily life, I repeat that I will make legislation to make the Tolosan language the sole official language, with English as a recognized minority language and French being the sole lingua franca of diplomatic relations and correspondence. I will also establish a Church of Tolosa, which will not be affiliated with the government in any way, with Tolosan and Latin being the working languages. I will also start an etymological research project with support of the Ladinche Nacional to determine the origin of the majority of words in our beautiful tongue. And intend on doing this after Robert I is received back into the kingdom, if at all. I intend to negotiate a deal with the Baron Seneschal to reinstate our coalition for the next term of government if re-elected, but with me having a little more wisdom on when and how to speak.
Leader Malt, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us here at the Abbavilla Digest, and we look forward to talking with you again on a future edition.
In Talossan, I have to sadly say that over the past at least 8 years, according to even places like Freedom House, the status of democracy in the United States has deteriorated. And the first reason I made this resolution is that when you have a nation as powerful and influential as the United States, when it experiences a democratic winter, that has a global impact. And I know that during the campaign, at least from the Green Party's perspective, we stated very firmly that we believe Talossa should not be isolationist and should speak on matters of global importance. This is one of them. We've seen that in the recent actions by the United States and Venezuela, the threats against Denmark and Greenland, the talk about actions in Iran. Now, again, I am an ardent Democrat, a global Democrat. I support the removal of Maduro. I support the removal of the Ayatollahs. But those things need to be done in compliance with international law. And they need to be done in ways that increase cooperation globally. And so this is a simple resolution that states our grave concern about the status of democracy in a place that describes itself as the leader of the free world. And I think this is really just the beginning in including the Seneschal's statement condemning U.S. actions, the kind of statements that we need to make a practice of making more regularly.
Immigration was a major topic during the last election campaign, and we here at the Abbavilla Digest note the latest transmittal of writs of termination from the Chancery. These are Tolossans who have failed to vote or respond to a national census over the past 2 years, and is also a sad part of the general election process. Talossa is a small kingdom with around 120 citizens, so the loss of these 8 individuals is itself not so small. One thing we have noted is the recency of all but one of the citizens based on their citizen number. This may point to an ongoing issue with retaining new citizens and could be something for this government or future governments to prioritize addressing. These 8 folks are now former Talossan citizens: James Coffey, Mitchell Paul, John Andrews, Nasir Ahmed, Ivan Molov, Sergio Flumingnan, Yanir Gonzalez Amaro, and Katrina Bukharin. Opposition leader Mikhail Autofil and URL MC Marcel Tafial recently announced the creation of l'Institut del Agroicismo Political, or the Institute for Political Nerdery. They describe the effort as basically nerding out about a subject we enjoy, the various ways to analyze elections, look at different systems of voting, end quote. The duo started off the inaugural discussion for the Institute on something called the Gallagher Index. This index measures how closely the distribution of seats matches the election results. The greater the difference, the higher the number. They then calculated Talossa's Gallagher Index, which was 0.17762, which they found to be quite low, comparable to the macronation of Guyana. The index is a pretty straightforward number, but it opens the door to much bigger questions. How fair was an election? How well does a voting system reflect the will of the voters? And could a different system produce a different result? Those are exactly the kinds of questions the Institute for Political Nerdery appears intent on exploring, enthusiastically, and hopefully with charts. Sometimes the best way to understand democracy is to nerd out about it.